Obviously, you're here because of Jerry's passing. Your initial reaction when you heard the news today?
Well, Jerry Lewis was a complicated character. He could sometimes be difficult to deal with, but there's one thing about Jerry. He was very committed to the Muscular Dystrophy Association. His commitment to that was total, complete, and nobody knows why. To this day, he took that secret to his grave. He never would answer the question. I asked him plenty of times, and he would kid me, "You still trying to find out, huh?" I said, "Yeah." But he was totally committed to it. One time we had a news conference here when he came into town, and none of the reporters asked him questions. And this was in 1981. Now, Jerry was a big star. And these reporters were very young people who grew up watching Jerry Lewis movies. And I tried to convince him they didn't ask questions, not because he was a dull person, but because they were awestruck. And these hard-bitten reporters were indeed awestruck, and just, they were just looking at him in amazement. You wouldn't think that would happen today, but back in 1981, 82, it did.
Like you said, you spent time working alongside him.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, he would come to town to promote the Muscular Dystrophy Association and fundraisers we were having here in Nashville. Being in his company and working with him was always very interesting. If he saw two people together, that was an audience to be entertained, and he would entertain them. Now, you have to understand, entertainers, they don't go through lobbies at hotels. They go through the kitchen passageways and then come out the ballroom they're supposed to be in. Well, he was walking through the kitchen area, putting on a mini show for all the dishwashers, cooks, and sous chefs and everybody there. And it was really a show within itself. But he'd be going through real quick and do a quick show. He was always on, at least in my presence.
How many times did you get to work alongside him at the telethon?
He did the telethon in Vegas mostly, and I did it in Nashville. So we never worked together during the telethon. But we had a very active Muscular Dystrophy Association chapter. I spent most of my time with Jerry Lewis when he came in town to do fundraisers. And there was one time in particular that he came into town with Charlton Heston. And Oprah Winfrey was next to me, and she was a young girl, 19 years old at the time. Jerry walked in, I believe Jerry did, but then when Charlton Heston walked in, Oprah grabbed my arm and said, that's Moses, he's here. I said, no, the star of the show is Jerry Lewis. Remember that, please, when you meet Jerry especially.
I was watching, not just a little while before this, on CBS Evening News, they had an obit piece, and they were talking about how he actually was criticized at times when he started his raising money and everything for Jerry's kids. Why do you think that was?
I don't know why Jerry Lewis would have been criticized for raising money for people with muscular dystrophy diseases, but he was criticized, and I never fully understand it. I think a lot of people thought he was just doing it to promote himself, but by that time, he was big enough. He didn't need to do anything to promote himself. Now, he held some patents on some pretty far-reaching movie technique equipment that today is standard, especially in the digital age. So he didn't need anybody to promote him. He was already a big star. And why he was criticized, I have no idea. But he was very much so criticized.
I mean, he was a huge part of raising just so much money.
Listen, the Muscular Dystrophy Association would not be what it is today without Jerry Lewis at starting it. And thousands of patients live more productive lives, a little bit longer productive lives, because of the efforts of Jerry Lewis. He deserves everybody's thanks for what he did. Unselfishly, I'm convinced. He was committed to muscular dystrophy. I'm convinced of that. For no ulterior reasons. The only reason was he took to the grave. Nobody knows.
With a life like his and the films, from working alongside Dean Martin to all the way up to the muscular dystrophy cause, what does he leave behind?
Jerry Lewis leaves behind a reputation as an excellent filmmaker. That's recognized today in France. One day it'll be recognized how good he really was in putting together comedies in this country. We were way behind the French curve on that, appreciating his filmmaking abilities. and he will be known as a philanthropist of the first order. What he did for Muscular Dystrophy Association and the thousands of people is you can't even describe it. It's off the scale. He'll be remembered for those two things eventually.
Do you have a specific, just one memory that really pops out from the interactions you had with Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, he pushed me out on stage. We were doing a show at the auditorium, and I was the MC of it. And Dolly Parton came off, and I waited a second too long to go on to introduce him, and he just shoved me. "Do it now, Chris." I said, "Yes, sir." And went out there. I learned a great showbiz lesson from Jerry Lewis, that you get on stage fast. You don't let the audience clapping die down before you're back on the stage. That's my one memory.